I want to take you back to a moment I've replayed in my mind more times than I can count. Back to the woman I used to be, the one who believed that loving someone meant making yourself smaller so they could stand taller. Back to before I understood that there is a difference between sacrifice and surrender. I didn't learn that difference easily, and I didn't learn it without cost. But let me start at the beginning, because the end only makes sense if you know where it started. I was 31 years old when my husband walked out. My son was 4. He had a stuffed elephant named Peanut that he carried everywhere, a laugh that sounded like hiccups, and a habit of falling asleep mid-sentence. He was the most beautiful thing I had ever seen. And the moment those divorce papers were signed, I looked at him sitting on our kitchen floor, building a tower out of soup cans, and I made him a promise he couldn't hear. I promised him that he would never feel the weight of what had just broken. He would never go without. He would never have to choose between his dreams and his circumstances. Not on my watch. I kept that promise for 33 years. I worked as a hospital billing coordinator during the day and took weekend shifts at a hotel front desk for 11 years straight. 11 years of double shifts, of eating lunch at my desk, of buying my son's school clothes at the end of season sales, and pretending I'd just found a great deal. I told him the sales were the smart way to shop. I never told him that I had $47 in my checking account the week before his junior prom. I figured out a way. I always figured out a way. My son was brilliant. Genuinely, remarkably brilliant. His teachers said it. His coaches said it. I saw it every single night at our kitchen table when he'd work through problems with a focus that made him look 40 years old at 15. He wanted to be a lawyer. Not just any lawyer, he wanted to work in corporate law. Wanted to be the kind of man who walked into rooms that changed things. I believed him. I believed in him the way only mothers can believe in their children, with something that goes past logic and straight into the bones. When he got into law school, a good one, a real one, the kind with a name people recognize, I did something I had been quietly considering for 2 years. I sold the house I'd bought on my own after the divorce, the house where he had learned to ride a bike in the driveway, where I had painted his bedroom walls navy blue because he asked me to, and I stood on a ladder for 6 hours on a Saturday to do it right. I sold that house, and I used a significant portion of the proceeds to help cover his tuition and living expenses for the first 2 years. He knew about it. He hugged me in the driveway the day I handed him the check and told me he would pay me back every cent. I told him not to worry about it, that it was an investment, that watching him succeed would be payment enough. I meant it when I said it. Law school was 3 years of phone calls where he sounded tired and alive at the same time. I drove 7 hours round trip twice a semester to bring him home-cooked food, chili in mason jars, his grandmother's cornbread, the chocolate chip cookies he'd been eating since he was old enough to hold one. I wanted him to open that cooler bag and feel something solid, something that said someone is still here, someone still has you. He met his girlfriend the second year. She was in his program, sharp and polished, and perfectly put together in a way that made me feel like I was always slightly rumpled when I was around her. I tried. I genuinely tried with her. I invited her to Thanksgiving the first year. I asked about her family, her interests, her plans. She answered everything with a kind of courteous brevity that left no room for follow-up. My son looked at her the way you look at something you cannot believe is yours. So I told myself to be patient. Love makes people strange at first. They got married 2 years after he graduated. A small ceremony, her idea. And honestly, I respected it. I wore the blue dress I'd bought for my work Christmas party the year before, and I sat in the front row and I cried the good kind of tears. I thought, this is it. This is what all of it was for. My son, standing at an altar, whole and steady, and ready for his life. What I didn't realize was that a door had just quietly closed. It happened slowly, the way most painful things do. The holiday invitations started coming later and later, until one year I found out by accident, through something my son mentioned in passing, that they'd spent Christmas with her family and weren't planning to come to mine. I had already bought the groceries. I made the meal anyway, and ate it alone, and told myself families go through adjustments. It's normal. He's building his own life. That's what you raised him to do. I moved to a smaller apartment when I retired. Nothing wrong with small. I had a window with good light and a little balcony where I kept tomato plants in the summer. But I noticed that my son never brought her to see it. He came alone sometimes, briefly, and those visits had a quality to them rushed, slightly distracted, like a man running an errand rather than visiting his mother. I told myself I was reading into things. My daughter-in-law never called me by anything warm, not Mom, which I had never asked for and didn't expect. But not Margaret either. She found ways to begin sentences that didn't require using my name at all. My grandchildren, 2 of them, a boy and a girl born 18 months apart. I saw them on the schedule I was given, every other month. Birthdays if I was lucky. I kept their photos on my refrigerator, and I learned their favorite things from what my son mentioned, and I always had the right snacks, the right books, the right little activities waiting. I was a guest in their lives, but I showed up like a resident. Then came the partnership dinner. My son had been working toward making partner at his firm for 4 years. It was a serious achievement, the kind he had been building toward since that kitchen table at 15, since those soup can towers on the floor, since the navy blue walls I painted alone on a Saturday. When he called to tell me he'd gotten it, I sat down on my couch and I pressed my hand over my mouth because the sound that came out of me was not quite crying and not quite laughing. It was something that had no name, something that had been waiting 33 years to be released. He said they were hosting a celebration dinner. The firm, his colleagues, close family. He said, of course I was invited. He said it the way you say something you are required to say, but I pushed that thought down and I told him I would be there. I bought a new dress. Dark green. Fitted. Understated. I had my hair done. I drove 40 minutes to the restaurant, and I sat in the parking lot for 5 minutes reminding myself that tonight was not about me. Tonight was his night. I was there to witness it. That was enough. The restaurant was the kind of place where everything was dark wood and low lighting, and the menus had no prices. His partners and their spouses were already seated when I arrived. His colleagues, some friends of theirs I didn't know. I was directed to a seat at the far end of the second table. Not the main table. The second table. I sat down between a colleague's husband I had never met and an empty chair that stayed empty for most of the evening. I watched my son at the center of the main table. He was magnetic in that room. Confident. Comfortable in a way that made me proud, in a way that hurt a little. My daughter-in-law sat beside him with her hand on his arm, and she worked the room the way she had always worked rooms effortlessly. Never out of reach. Never off message. The toast started after the main course. 2 of his partners spoke. A close friend from law school. Then my daughter-in-law stood up, and the room quieted with the particular attention people give to a beautiful woman who is clearly practiced at being watched. She spoke about my son with genuine feeling, his work ethic, his mind, his dedication to their family. She thanked his mentors by name. She thanked his firm. She thanked her own parents for their support over the years. She did not mention me. Not once. I sat at the end of the second table, and I kept my face very still, and I told myself it was an oversight. People forget things when they're nervous. She had a lot to cover. Then my son stood up. He spoke beautifully. He was warm and funny and precise in the way I had always loved about him. He thanked his partners. He thanked his wife. He talked about his children. He mentioned his father-in-law by name, specifically for a loan in the early years that had helped them buy their first home. He did not mention the house I sold. He did not mention the 11 years of double shifts. He did not mention the 7-hour drives with mason jars of chili. When the applause died down, I don't know what moved me to do what I did next. Maybe it was the cumulative weight of all the years. Maybe it was sitting at the second table. Maybe it was hearing her parents thanked by name while I sat invisible at the end of a room celebrating something I had poured my life into. I raised my hand, not dramatically. Just a small gesture. The way you'd ask permission to speak at a meeting. My son looked over and something moved across his face. Something I recognized from when he was a child, and I asked him to do something he didn't want to do in front of his friends. I said, simply, that I just wanted to add a word, if that was all right. The room had that particular silence of a group of people waiting to see what would happen. My daughter-in-law's smile stayed exactly in place. My son said, "And I want you to understand that I am still, to this day, not entirely sure where it came from." He said, "Mom, this really isn't the time. This evening is about the firm and our family." I heard someone at the main table clear their throat. I looked at my son. The boy from the kitchen floor. The boy with the stuffed elephant and the hiccup laugh. The man I had given everything I had to build. And I said, very quietly, very clearly, "You're right. Your family should be here for this." Then I folded my napkin, placed it on the table, picked up my purse, and walked out of that restaurant. I did not look back. I sat in my car for a long time. I didn't cry, which surprised me. I had expected to cry. Instead, I felt something I could only describe as clarity, sharp and cold, and very, very quiet, like the moment after a storm passes and you step outside and the air is different. Everything stripped clean. I drove home and I sat on my balcony in the dark with a cup of tea, and I thought about 33 years. I thought about the house. I thought about the hotel front desk and the Christmas party dress I wore to his wedding. I thought about the second table and the empty chair beside me and my son's face when I raised my hand. I thought about what I had taught him by never asking for anything. I had taught him that I didn't need anything. That was my mistake, and it was a significant one. The next morning, my son called. I let it go to voicemail. He called again that afternoon. I let that go too. He texted, "Are you okay? I'm sorry if last night was uncomfortable. I want to talk." Uncomfortable. That was the word he chose. I sat with his messages for 3 days before I responded. Not out of cruelty. I want to be clear about that. I sat with them because for the first time in 33 years, I was not immediately managing his feelings before I had processed my own. That was new territory for me, and I needed to walk through it carefully. When I finally called him back, I did not cry. I did not tell him how many years I had sacrificed, or recite what I had given up, or describe the feeling of sitting at the second table. I said one thing. I said, "I need you to understand that I love you. And I also need you to understand that I will not be invisible. Not for you. Not for anyone. If you would like me in your life, I need to actually be in your life." He was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "I didn't know you felt this way." And I said, "I know." The months that followed were not easy. There is no version of this story where re-establishing yourself after 30 years of self-erasure is clean or simple. My son and I had real conversations, difficult ones, the kind we had never had because I had always smoothed things over before they could get uncomfortable. I told him about the hotel front desk. He hadn't known I'd worked weekends for that long. I told him about the house he knew I'd sold it, but I don't think he'd ever fully let himself do the math on what that meant for me. He cried when I told him about the navy blue walls. I don't know why that one hit him hardest. Maybe because it was such a small thing, such an ordinary act of love that no one would ever know to celebrate or acknowledge. He hadn't thought about it in years. I had never stopped. My daughter-in-law was harder to reach. And I want to be honest about that rather than giving you a tidy resolution. She and I were not suddenly transformed into close friends. We did not have a tearful breakthrough where everything became clear. What we built was something more modest and, I think, more durable. A working relationship built on mutual respect and the shared goal of not hurting the people we both loved. She acknowledged, in her way, that she could have done things differently. I acknowledged, in mine, that I had allowed dynamics to form that I should have addressed years earlier. Neither of us is wrong about the other. We are simply two very different women who love the same man. My grandchildren started coming to visit me more regularly. My son brought them. Sometimes, my daughter-in-law came too. I kept the tomato plants on the balcony, and I kept the right snacks and the right books, and now I also keep a box of board games and a drawer of art supplies, because I have learned to plan for the visits, rather than just hope for them. My grandson asked me once, while we were planting seeds in small pots on the balcony, why I lived by myself. He was 6. I told him that I liked my own company, which is true. He said he thought that was very brave. I thought about that for a long time afterward. Last spring, my son called me on a Tuesday evening, which was unusual. He said he wanted to ask me something. He said the firm was doing a short biography feature on each partner, a profile for their website, a few paragraphs about background and influences. He wanted to know if he could mention me. He wanted to include the house. He wanted to name me by name and say, in public, in a professional context, that I was the foundation everything had been built on. I said yes. Of course I said yes. But what I want to tell you, what I want you to really hear, is that it mattered less than I expected it to. Not because his acknowledgement wasn't meaningful. It was, but I had spent 33 years needing it. By the time it came, I had already given it to myself. There's something I know now that I wish someone had told me when my son was 4 years old, sitting on that kitchen floor. Loving your children is not the same as disappearing for them. You can give everything without giving yourself. You can sacrifice without surrendering. The line between the two is real, and it matters. And teaching your children where it is, by living it yourself, out loud, where they can see it, is one of the most important things a parent can do. I spent 33 years teaching my son that I had no needs. And then I spent several very hard years unlearning that lesson alongside him. We are both better for the unlearning. I am 64 years old. I have a small apartment with a window that gets good light and tomato plants on the balcony and photographs of my grandchildren on the refrigerator and a son who now calls me on Tuesdays just to talk, not because he needs something, but because we have finally, after all this time, figured out how to know each other. I am not a cautionary tale. I am a woman who loved fiercely and imperfectly, and who eventually, later than I would have liked, learned to include herself in the people she loved. I would not trade a single year of it, not even the hard ones, especially not the hard ones.